Why are there so many contradictions in the Old Testament, Hebrew Scriptures? We say that it's a problem. It should be a problem for Christians that there's so many contradictions in their New Testament. Are we being biased? I'm going to find out. Sit tight. We will be right back. Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live out of Kingsland, Texas, USA, with episode number 136 of Rabbi Tovia Singer's Let's Get Biblical Q&A, coming to you from Jakarta, Indonesia. That awesome Rabbi Tovia, the man singer. Welcome back. Sweet
it's great to be here.
Great to have you here, as always.
Great to have me on, as always.
Of course it is.
This is the flagship show.
Of course, I'm speaking selfishly. You know,
carries it all.
This is time that I feel very. I still remember a very first phone call that I ever had with you, and whenever you answered the phone, I was like, "Oh my God, he answered the phone! I'm talking to Tovia Singer." It's like Elvis, the Elvis of the Judaism world regarding counter missionary.
This is every day for me. Every day, every day.
That's wonderful. It's neat that you're that reachable. That's what's really cool too. So I'm really like that. That really helped me out in that moment for sure. So today is going to be a really, really interesting topic. I've heard this question asked. I asked the question myself a few times. I came to my own conclusions, which I'm very satisfied with. But I am really, really, really glad this question is going to air now. So real quickly, I want to tell everybody, make sure that when you call, if you see this on your screen, caller on, and you call, your phone call will not get answered. That's pretty much a guarantee. However, if you don't mind that, leave a voicemail and we will go back at our earliest convenience and listen to them all and see which ones are good for the show. But if you want to make sure that your call makes it in, then don't call when that's on. And I'll try to do my best to keep the screen updated to make sure everybody knows when the caller's on and when the phone lines are open. So with that said, let me play this. First of all, let me pause this music, and then I'm going to play this sound clip for you now.
I just had a question. Listening to the rabbi talk about the contradictions in the New Testament. I'm not a Christian. I am a Noahide. I run a Noahide community. But I wanted to see if we apply the same stricture with their contradictions as we apply to our own contradictions. For example, in Chronicles versus Kings, there's numbers of discrepancies between the numbers of troops that went to war and that died in battle. I don't have anything in front of me right now, but that's just an example. But back to you.
Okay. I've seen, Rabbi, also more contradictions as well, like where it mentions names and there's somebody missed a name here or whatever the case may be. So as much detail as you could give us would be greatly appreciated. Take it away, boss.
What's very striking is we've been doing this show for quite a number of years, and I've been talking to folks for a very long time that this question should have come up and never has. No one's ever asked that question. It's really a very important one. I generally don't deal with internal contradictions of the Christian Bible. I think the ones that are most relevant, germane, are those where the Christian Bible is inconsistent with Tanakh, with the Jewish scriptures, rather than internal contradictions in the Christian Bible. The reason I say that, is just as an introduction, is that it could be some Christian scribe made a mistake, and that mistake found its way into the manuscript tradition, let's say the Alexandrian manuscript tradition. But there's an implication in that if there were no contradictions in the Christian Bible, which could have easily happened if at some earlier stage, if the canonization of the 27 books of the New Testament had not taken place in 367, that's the earliest point that we know of. We have a formal list of which books are considered part of the Christian canon and which are not. The Bishop of Alexandria will issue that decision. It doesn't mean it was all solved then, but that's our first list. Had now in 367, that's almost 300 years after these books were written. In the case of Paul's letters are more than 3 centuries later. So if that had happened, instead of Constantine converting to Christianity, had we had a earlier emperor who had converted to Christianity and turned the empire Christian, advocated for the church, accepted Christianity as a lawful religion, a preferred religion. So if we had Theodosius and a Constantine in the 2nd century, it's possible that in an earlier stage, somebody could have said, okay, we have the authority to clean this up and just do a kind of Tatian job on it. What he does in the 2nd century is there's this one guy, bright fellow, toward the end of the 2nd century, who actually takes all 4 Gospels and creates like a harmony of the Gospels in a book called the Diatessaron, which survives. So he actually puts it all, so everything happens. I don't think he was doing that for theological reasons. He wanted to produce one gospel that had it all. So the point is, if, let's say, there were no internal contradictions in the Christian Bible, would that make Jesus the Messiah? The answer is, of course not. The reason why Jesus is not the Messiah is because there's no relationship between what Tanakh teaches about what Mashiach is supposed to do and what the Christian Bible and the church tell us that Jesus did. They're completely unrelated. And that's why we reject it, not because there are contradictions. Certainly, when we see that New Testament authors very deliberately altered the Jewish scriptures to make it appear Christological, so then we already have that, we have now mischief, we have criminal intent. When Matthew alters Micah, Matthew 2:6, what does it say in Micah 5:2 or 5:1, depending on what kind of, that's really very aggressive stuff. You know, when Matthew splits apart Isaiah 8:22, 23, 9:1 in order to produce Matthew 4, I'm not going to go into it now. So that's really very shocking. And what Paul in Hebrews did is so appalling that I really had when I first started studying this, let's say 40 years ago or so, even more than that, I was not expecting that. I didn't expect it to be like anything remotely like that. But the point is that if there were no contradictions in the between the Gospels within the New Testament itself, that wouldn't make Christianity any more true. It certainly is it's just an indictment against the writers of the New Testament, the doctors and editors of the church. Certainly, very, very much so. It's very, very shocking. Now, a question that someone should have come up with, but rarely does, is there are contradictions in Tanakh, in the Jewish scriptures, where we have, let me give an example. So let's say a contradiction we would find in the Christian Bible. The kind of contradiction, he mentioned a numbers contradiction. So you have how many women went to the tomb the Easter morning to find an empty tomb. Well, it really very much depends. You know, if it's Matthew 3, Mark 2, Luke, you have 4, and John, you have 1. Mary Magdalene comes alone. So you have number contradictions, what appear to be number contradictions in Tanakh as well. Lahavdil, but you do. I don't think those are very significant. I don't think that the number of women at the tomb is in any way is a serious question about the veracity of the Christian Bible. That's not important. You've never heard me talk about it. I do have in Volume 1 an extensive chart where I go through the entire Passion narrative as it's they appear in all four Gospels, and then unpack it completely and go through nearly 100 contradictions, and some of them are quite striking. But the numbers thing is not, I don't think, a very significant problem, because Christians can argue that that you can't argue from silence. If for whatever reason Matthew thought it would be good to mention only 2 women, and Luke would mention at least 4, and Mark would mention 2, the 2 Marys. Well, doesn't mean anything. They're not saying, a Christian would argue, they're not saying those are the only women. Just for whatever reason, they decide to point out those women and not the others. Now, you've got to work out in your mind, is that is that a torturous answer or not? I don't think it's a terrible answer. It's not overly exciting. I'm sure Christians would be much happier if all the Gospels just said the same number of women appeared. But I could kind of figure out a reason why Mark would want Salome at the tomb and John would not. I mean, I can come up with this. But these, I think, are just not really very important, because they're answers that are really, there are answers that Christians have to it. They've been working on this, and frankly, this is the least of it. So let's take an example that this fellow called in. He asked about the number of fighting men in the house of Israel and in Israel and in Judah. How many fighting men were them? So it depends. Believe it or not, there's a contradiction, and the contradiction is between 2 Samuel chapter 24 and 1 Chronicles chapter 21. And in there we have a striking contradiction of numbers. According to 2 Samuel chapter 24 verse 9, the number of fighting men were 800,000, and Judah was 500,000, 500,000. If we go to 1 Chronicles chapter 21, so the number of men was 1,100,000, and in Judah was 470,000. So we have a different census. This taking of a census, I'm not going to go into now, but just know that the census that Job gave to David is going to trigger a very serious problem. Censuses are a very big problem. The question is, how is this resolved? Well, it's not difficult to find a resolution, because in what we find in 2 Samuel is that the men that are fighting men, they call Anshe Chayil, which means that these are very highly trained soldiers, like we'll call them special forces. And whereas we don't find this text in 1 Samuel in 1 Chronicles chapter 21, where there we don't have that extra word Chayil there, and that means just right now we'll just call it elite forces, Green Beret. Okay, and moreover, if we go to the very next verse in 1 Chronicles chapter 21, but not verse 5, but verse 6, we are told explicitly that Judah, that although Judah was counted, but Benjamin and Levi were not among them. They were not counted among them. So they're literally like advertising. We have a variant in the numbers, because in this case, this counting, this assessment, was an assessment without including Benjamin. It's understandable why Benjamin would have been kept out of any kind of a census. one census is because Benjamin was a tribe that was virtually almost wiped out, was almost sent into extinction because of a horrible tragedy in the book of Judges. Judges, the story of the Pelegish Begiva, Judges chapter 19, 20, 21. It's a horrible event. I'm not going into it now, but it triggered a civil war among the children of Israel, and the tribe of Benjamin was almost completely wiped out. And when literally it was realized that there would be no more Benjamin left, they stopped the war. You know, there's no war like a civil war. America's most bloodiest war was a civil war. Twice as many Americans died fighting Americans as they did fighting the Germans and Japanese during World War II. In the previous century, when there's a family fight, that's what it's a very serious matter. So the point now, I want to mention one other thing I think that should be said. And that is that I could come up with much better contradictions between Samuel and Chronicles than the one that the caller put through. It just, you can have much stronger contradictions than that. These contradictions I see off of websites, but if you actually go through the text, you'll have a lot more interesting contradictions. I have a video on the contradictions that are really staggering. And why does Chronicles present information differently than Samuel Kings? And that's because of the author, the time, the audience to whom he was speaking, and his theological message. The author of Chronicles is Ezra. Ezra HaSefer is speaking to his audience are the Shevivei Tzion, the Jews who had returned back to build the Second Temple. Samuel and Kings is about the problems and dangers and so on, and the sins and mistakes and the errors that had occurred. Chronicles is not interested in highlighting that because the first temple had already been destroyed. The Jews already had endured the 70-year exile. And we have it built into the text, just like I showed you here, where the Ezra, who writes Chronicles, he always puts in, like in the next verse or somewhere, a little piece there. Look there, this is the reason why it's different. Because Ezra obviously has Sefer Shmuel in front of him. He obviously has Sefer Melachim in front of him. Yirmiyahu lived before Ezra. So he has that in front of him. So he puts in, he tells you, look, Chronicles counts David as the youngest of 7 brothers. Samuel is the youngest of 8 brothers. Elihu is missing from Chronicles, not of counting of the brothers, a very important one, chapter 2. But Ezra is interested in highlighting the number 7 in association with David. As it turns out, there was one son of Jesse that was born to a different mother, but obviously it was his son, but he had another wife. But he wanted to highlight that David was the 7th, because 7 is a number of perfection. Now, the author of Chronicles wants to make sure you know this is only for theological reasons. So Elihu is mentioned somewhere he's mentioned in Chronicles. Not like he's wiped out. It's just in this very sacred genealogy, it's not there. Meaning, that's really, people have tough time with Chronicles just a moment. In studying Divrei Hayomim, it's really one sefer, is because the first 9 chapters is a genealogy. And a person could really, unless you have a good teacher, you can lose your mind studying. And unless you study and realize and mine out the jewels, the gems, the dimes, the gold, you might miss it. It looks like just families of genealogy, waves of genealogies. And you go, why is it there? And there's genealogies in Chronicles that are of illegitimate families. I'm not going into it now. So as it turns out, when people ask me personally this question about this or that, I tell them, look, I can come up with much better equipment than that. Going back to our good friend, the gospel writer, Matthew. So Matthew is different in many ways than the other gospels. John is even more significantly different than the first 3 gospels known as the synoptic meaning two Greek words with one with the same view, because Matthew, Mark, and Luke are essentially the same story. There's quite a few variations, but 90% of John is found nowhere in the Synoptic Gospels. So I want to bring this point together. I don't think the numbers thing matter very much. I don't know if, how these traditions crept in and then were at variant with each other, but I don't think it matters when it comes to numbers, because you could very easily come up with solutions to number problems. It's very easy to do. It's very easy to do with the Christian Bible, and it's lahavdil. It's very easy to do with Tanakh. With Tanakh, I can actually show that there's actually a reason. I can show it in the text that there's a reason, which you don't really have with the Christian Bible. Am I biased? I am. So, but I think a person who studies Tanakh will find the explanation to make sense, meaning I'm not just reverse engineering it. In almost all cases, I could show you the actual text that points to the exact reason why there's a variation. Whether it's a king who becomes king at the age of 8, but he can't. There has to be a regent who would be put in place because you can't have an 8-year-old running the country. So the answer is really you can demonstrate in almost all cases why it's there, and actually leads you to very interesting discoveries. You don't have that in the Christian Bible. But as I said, I don't think the number contradictions are important at all. This is my opinion. I don't think they're very important, and I never bring them up. It is in my book. I do point them out. What I think is very significant in the internal contradictions of the Christian Bible are those contradictions which really are telling a completely different story. That means it's not just there's a piece of information that's different, but you really are we're listening to an entirely different story, and they're completely incompatible with each other. The two stories are so incompatible because they're just different stories. And there are two types of this. One is like you'd find Luke's passion, the passion narrative and the infancy narratives are where you find contradictions that really there is no solution. And rarely do even Christian apologists deal with them. The very, very significant differences. Let me just give you an example. It's not a number. It's about just what happened. Like the picture of what happened. Matthew's passion narrative begins, the resurrection story begins in Matthew 28, the last chapter. We are told that early in the morning, Mary, Magdalene, and the other Mary come to the tomb early Sunday morning. Now, here's what's not interesting. So there's an earthquake, an angel rolls away the stone from the front of the tomb, sits on the stone. That part you don't find in the other Gospels, but again, they may have not included it. Now, I want to put my cards on the table here. I think that I know they're just making up these stories, and we have just different plot devices for reasons that I could explain, but it's beyond the scope of this show. But a Christian could reasonably say it just wasn't included. Here's what's very, very important. So what happens is that the women encounter this individual who is, what he's wearing is white and bright, and it's clearly they're encountering an angel who tells them that Jesus is not there, the tomb is empty. He is already risen. He's gone before you to Galilee. Go back, tell the disciples that they should meet Jesus in the Galilee. Okay, that's the whole thing. Okay, and the story continues that the that the disciples went to the Galilee and they worshiped Jesus, but some doubted it, whatever. So that's the doubting part that you have frequently in the Gospels. So that story works internally. It fancifully works. The women come to the tomb. They find an angel rolling away the stone. They are told that Jesus already rose. And then on the way back, one point I didn't mention is they encounter Jesus on the way back from leaving the angel who has already informed them that Jesus rose from the dead. They literally meet Jesus first. Okay, the Marys meet Jesus first, and then they met Jesus, they grab a hold of him, they worship him, and they continue and meet the disciples. And now, by the time they reach the disciples, they've got all this information. Disciples go back, and the story ends. Now, I'm not getting into the fact that Luke says, don't go to Galilee, don't leave Jerusalem, stay here, because Luke needs the book of Acts to work, and you need the Pentecost story to work, and it wouldn't work if they went to the Galilee. But I want to ignore that. So by the time the women encounter the disciples, they know everything. They know everything because the angel, the man that rolled away the stone, informed them that Jesus isn't there and he has already risen. He's gone before the Galilee, and there you will see him. And they have it directly on word from Jesus, who repeats essentially the same exact story. Go tell the disciples and Peter. Okay? So they are thoroughly convinced that Jesus rose from the dead. They know the whole deal because they've got it now from two sources. By the time the women reach the disciples. Okay? So that story works. Now, I don't want to compare it to Luke. I don't want to compare it to Mark. Mark really ends in chapter 16, verse 8. The last 12 verses are a later insertion. There's no encounter with Jesus, a resurrection encounter with Jesus. I want to ignore that. What I'm very interested in is John. And here, we only have to deal with the first two passages of John chapter 20. Here we have Mary Magdalene who comes. Mary Magdalene is always front and center of all the passion narratives, always. Although she is virtually unheard of, with one exception, she's never heard of during Jesus' life and ministry. With one exception, Luke, she's everywhere, front and center in the resurrection accounts. And I have we once did a show where I talked about why I believe that's the case. Because I think she's the one responsible for this whole deal. And that's why she's suddenly so prominent. But the key is John. Mary Magdalene in John chapter 20, I should just probably just read a few right here. It's very simple. Mary Magdalene comes to the tomb while it's still dark. I don't want to get into whether it was dark already, not dark. Did she see the stone taken away? Didn't see the stone taken away? Did she see there was an earthquake, no earthquake? Forget all of that. All that stuff, ignore it. Grant everything. So what happens is now, it's the first day of the week. Mary Magdalene came early. It was still dark. And she arrives at the tomb, and she already sees that the stone had been taken away from the front of the tomb. I just have a point about stones and tombs. At this time in Jewish history, burials often went that way. They had caves, and they put the body inside the cave, and they'd have to put a stone in front of the cave. Why? Because if you didn't cover the front of the tomb properly, you had a dead body laying on the floor or on a bench, and there are thousands of them all over Israel, so you can have wild animals that can come and take the body. That would be a great desecration of a person's body. So the bodies are covered by a huge slab of stone. This is typical. Mm-hmm. But so she comes and finds that Gibakuk, look inside, there's nothing there. There's no one there. There's no angel there to inform her anything. She is shocked out of her mind. What happens? She runs back, and she runs and goes to Simon Peter and the other disciple, who Jesus loved, meaning John, and said to them, they took the Lord's body out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have laid him. So she comes to the tomb, there's nothing there. She, in contrast to Matthew, there's no angel there. There's no instructions there. She has no clue where he is. And as far as she's concerned, Jesus' body was taken away. Somebody must have taken it away, because if you put a body in a tomb and then come back on Sunday morning or very early Sunday morning and there's nobody there and the stone is rolled away, of course the only conclusion you can say is someone came, rolled away the stone, and took the body away. If you don't have the narrative, the device that the synoptics use, of course that's what you do. Someone took away the body. They rolled away the stone and took the body away. So that's what she says to them. Now, that would have been impossible according to Matthew, because according to Matthew, she would never have stated they took away the body and we don't know what laid them. Why? Because according to Matthew, she already knows it from the angel. She already knows it from meeting Jesus. He met Jesus himself. They worshiped him. So how could she not know this? It gets more interesting. So Peter and the disciple, meaning, well, we'll just presume that the disciple Jesus loved in John is the disciple John. They went to the tomb, okay, and they ran together. And then the point is, she then returns back to a tomb, and she's standing outside of it now in chapter 20, verse 10. Chapter 20, verse 10 of John. So the disciples went away to the home. They've seen it all. They already looked in. But here is what happens. Mary is standing outside the tomb, and she's crying. Sie weint. She's crying. And as she's weeping, she looks inside the tomb, which she thought was empty. And as it turns out, she sees two angels, and they're in white, sitting, one where the head would have been and one where the feet would have been, where Jesus was laid. And they ask her, "Woman, why are you crying?" And she said to them, "Because they have taken away my Lord, and I know not where they have laid him." I don't know where they put him. Now, this makes very little sense, because Jesus said he was going to resurrect from the dead. So why doesn't she know that? And according to Matthew, this is where it really gets crazy. According to Matthew, this would have also been impossible, because they put Roman soldiers in front of the tomb. That would have prevented this. So Matthew is trying to exclude that possibility, but John doesn't know anything about Matthew. And so the angels only ask her, "Why are you weeping?" And then, she explains, somebody took away the body. Well, how could she think that someone took away the body? According to Matthew, not only did the angel tell her, according to Matthew, Jesus told her and told her what to tell the disciples. She doesn't tell disciples anything like that. The instructions given disciples go to Galilee in Matthew, in the Synoptic Gospels. Here, it's a totally different message. It's a non-message. Mary then concludes there is no Jesus, nothing. And someone stole his body away. That means he didn't rise from the dead. I mean, according to the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus tells his followers during his lifetime that he's going to suffer and die and be raised. Why would this? I can understand why someone says, "Well, I have to have faith," but it wouldn't be zero. You'd go, "Well, I guess," you'd go, "Either I guess it could have happened," or. But she just assumes that the most natural thing happened. And that is, if you buried someone somewhere and then come back to the cemetery Sunday morning, you buried someone on Friday and you come back to the cemetery Sunday morning, what logically anyone would say is someone dug up the grave and took the body and put it somewhere. Where is it? Do you know where it is? That's what anyone would do. And that's how John's story also internally works fine. It explodes when it clashes with the other. They have nothing to do with each other. Then it gets even a little nuttier. And as she's saying this, what happens? Just then she turns back and she sees Jesus. But she didn't recognize it was. She didn't know it was him. And then Jesus turns to her and he asks essentially the same question. He says, "Woman, why are you crying?" The same question the angels ask. "And who are you looking for?" She, as it turns out, doesn't recognize him. So she thinks that he's the gardener. That's why he's out there near the tomb. And she she then tells me, she then asks him, essentially, did you take it away? Do you have something to do with this? And then Jesus finally said to her, Mary, and then finally she says, Rabboni, or master, recognizing that she now sees Jesus. And Jesus then says, don't touch me, in contrast to Matthew. But I think that's very insignificant. So those stories could not have both have occurred. It's not a number issue. You can answer numbers that people are rounding it off. It's not arguing from silence. This is not a number issue. The question is, when Mary encounters Jesus for the first time, does she know did she have the information that Jesus rose from the dead or not? Does she know what happened or not? According to Matthew, she definitely knows. By the time Mary meets the disciples, here's a question, just make it even more difficult to answer. By the time Mary meets the disciples for the first time, Sunday morning, Easter morning, does she know or does she not know that Jesus rose from the dead? I mean, this is not just a piece of information. This is the whole story. This is the whole point. This is like everything. This is about, do you know that Jesus rose from the dead? That's everything. It's not a question of what color it is, a different perspective. None of those answers work. It's an entirely different story, and they can't be solved. There are attempts that have been made. I've seen them, but anyone looking at it would know this is so torturous. Again, the question that every Christian has to answer is the following: on Sunday morning, when Mary first meets the disciples, meets Peter and John, does she know the story of what happened, that Jesus rose from the dead, or not? According to Matthew, she very much does know the answer. She knows that Jesus rose from the dead. She knows where Jesus is going to meet the disciples, and that's her whole message. His message is, go to the Galilee, and there you'll meet up. According to John, she has no clue. And in fact, we can see this very clearly, that when she's speaking to the angels in John 20, she asks them, do you know where they put the body? So clearly, she has no idea. Moreover, if you were to say afterwards the angels told her to comport with Matthew and the synoptics, you have now more problems than you ever had, because when she then turns around and sees Jesus, whom she thinks is the gardener, she still does not know. And she asks him, do you know where it is? Did you put him anywhere? She doesn't know. Those two, that means here we are encountering a different story. This is not a numbers issue. This is not if she got there, how many days was Jesus in the tomb? Was it 3 days and 3 nights, or 3 days and 2 nights? Those are contradictions, but there are solutions. You can come up with solutions. You have to decide if those solutions are forced and torturous and reverse engineered, or do they really match? Is there some reason for it? And that's a decision. That's your call, not mine. But this is not important. What is significant here is that John is telling us a completely different story, which is entirely incompatible with the synoptic gospels. Moreover, you can go with John, you can go further, and that is on just which day was Jesus crucified. According to John, he was crucified on the eve of Passover. According to John, the Last Supper was not a Passover Seder. Jesus is equated with the lamb. See John chapter 1, verse 29 and 36. The lamb is slaughtered on the eve of Passover, the 14th day of Nisan. John, for theological reasons, wants Jesus to be the Lamb of God, not Matthew, Mark, and Luke. This is unique to John, and we also find it in Paul, in 1 Corinthians. That's it. So that's not it, just those. You have Peter as well. But the key is that we have John literally changing datum, having Jesus executed on the eve of Passover, the 14th day of Nisan, which is still Friday. But for example, I'll just give you an example. So John's Last Supper is in John chapter 13. And in John chapter 13, they're having a dinner, but they're not having a Pesach Seder, and Jesus is washing the feet of the disciples, a story you won't find anywhere in the Synoptic Gospels. Most people don't notice it, but there's a reason for it. There's no charosis there. Something else has to go on. In fact, when Judas Iscariot, look at the text carefully in John 13, is leaving with money, the disciples note that he's left with money. And I think in verse 29 of chapter 13, they presume that, oh, what is Judas Iscariot doing with the money? Well, this is actually the bribe money, but what does he do with the money? Surely he is going, they think, to use that money to buy goods, to buy food, buy the stuff that is needed for the festival meal, meaning the next night. But according to Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the Passover meal has already happened. They already ate it. That can't happen. Therefore, you would never find that. The story of the Jews not wanting to become contaminated in the book of John and to go into the palace, that will never happen in the Synoptics because the contamination issue is already done. According to the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus is crucified on the first day of Passover, I mean the 15th day of Nisan. And we know why John did this, because John wants Jesus to be the Passover lamb. And this idea, the Passover lamb, becomes very important in Christian theology. It shouldn't be, because the Passover lamb is not a sin offering. If anything, they should equate Jesus with Yom Kippur, but didn't go that way. So John literally says it was the eve of Passover, up and down. So John's passion narrative it's not, again, a numbers issue. I would just ignore the fact of what time they got there, what time she got there, and John is only one person, and Luke there's more than 4 people, but this is all not important. What is very significant is we have a totally different story. When Mary encounters the disciples for the first time, does she know that Jesus rose from the dead or not? According to Matthew, Mark, and Luke, she does, and according to John, she definitely doesn't. And in fact, the first person to inform her that Jesus rose from the dead is, in fact, Jesus himself, who turns out to be not a gardener, but Jesus. That can't be worked out. That's what is significant, because it's significant because it's just a different story. It's not 470,000 versus 500,000. It could be rounded off. We have rounded off sometimes in Tanakh. It's very unlikely that we have all these numbers, especially in Samuel King's Chronicles, which are always a base 10. In contrast, we have numbers in different areas, like in the book of Numbers, where we have a precise number, where it's all the fighting men in that census was really very different for each tribe. Exact numbers, it comes out to 603,550. But you could have a rounding off. That's not important. What is important is what is the story, what's being conveyed, what happened, just what happened, what happened. Okay, I'll give one other example of this. And I discuss this in Volume 1 of Let's Get Biblical. And that's, again, we're going now to the infancy narrative. So instead of we're going to just roll it back 30 years or so to the conception and birth of Jesus. We are only told that Jesus was conceived in an unusual manner, in that his mother was a virgin when she had conceived of Jesus. In only 2 books in the entire Christian Bible, Paul doesn't know anything about this. And it's possible that when Paul says not to speculate about genealogy and so on, he knew about this kind of rumor mill going around that there was something unusual about Jesus' birth. It's likely, and he's paying no attention to that. But what is important is that Mark also knows nothing or does not think that there was anything unusual about the conception of Jesus. We are introduced in the book of Mark, the earliest of the 4 Gospels, was Jesus an adult as baptism, following the incipit. It's only Matthew and Luke, written about the same time, written roughly a half a century after the time that Christians believe was the crucifixion, roughly in the 80s. There we have Jesus conceived to Mary, who was a virgin. It seems, incidentally, that John does know about it, but wants to push back against all this because Mary is so unimportant to John. Well, John wants Mary, the mother of Jesus, to be unimportant. That John, Mary, this mother of Jesus, is never mentioned by name in the Christian Bible. And our first introduction to her at a wedding in Cana, she is spoken of derisively because John's Jesus has to be the logos from eternity. And his conception of this is relatively immaterial. John, the author of the fourth gospel, wants to diminish everybody. It means Jesus is not even baptized in the book of John. I mean, John the Baptist does not baptize Jesus in John. John will have no part of that because the baptizer is usually superior to the one being baptized. Okay. Now, let's go to the infancy story. I'll just show you the variant there is absolutely impossible. Again, each story of the infancy narrative fancifully works independently. And I'm sure when Christians on Christmas night go to Mass, as I do every year, I'm kidding, and they have whatever the Passion plays, or not the Infancy plays, whatever the birth, whatever this goes on there. Haven't been there in a long time, I forgot. Whatever goes on, I think Christians look at it as, yeah, there are differences between Matthew and Luke, but it's just the same story, and just each of them are adding a little different information, but it's just harmony. And I've heard this many, many times. You know, harmony is made up of different notes, and it produces something more. Each of them are contributing something else, but it all works out. It doesn't work out. It can't work out. And I'll just highlight one point to give you a sense of what I mean by this. You just have to answer the following question. Mary and Joseph, what was their hometown? What city did they actually come from? That's all you need. That's the only question you need to answer. And that will immediately unpack a monumental theological problem. That there's no real resolution to this. And in fact, there are many evangelical scholars out there. They get in trouble for this, but they admit that there's no real resolution to this. They wish they were. I'm not going to mention names, but there are very serious Christian scholars who are very, very conservative and admit that this problem, there's no resolution to it. So according to Luke, Mary and Joseph come from Nazareth. That's their hometown. That's where they come from. They come from a little one-horse town in the Upper Galilee. What happens? There's a census, a worldwide census of the empire that is called, and that people, in order to be counted for the census for the purpose of taxation, everyone in the empire must return back to their ancestral home. Since we are told, it literally says it right in the beginning of Luke, that Joseph was from the house of David. Very important. Never Mary. All this stuff that Luke is Mary's genealogy, don't believe any of that. It's Joseph. So what happens is Joseph is a descendant of the house of David. Joseph has to travel from the Galilee all the way to Bethlehem, because after all, his great-grandfather would have been David HaMelech, King David, and David HaMelech, we know, was born in Bethlehem. To give you a sense of distance, in a car, Bethlehem to the Upper Galilee, without traffic, without a lot of traffic, would, I don't know, would be a 3-hour drive, It could be faster. It's not far. It's 80 miles, whatever. Bethlehem is just a little south. It's in the tribe of Yehuda, and just a little south of Yerushalayim, but not quite as south as Hebron. It's like not exactly halfway, but let's just say it's right between Hebron and Yerushalayim. It means we're dealing with very, not huge distances, but I don't know if this number is correct, but let's say the distance is 80 miles or so. But it's, it's not like you have super highways at the Interstate 80 that connects San Francisco with the George Washington Bridge. It's nothing like that. The key is that Joseph and Mary come to Bethlehem to be there for the census, because as it turns out, Mary is giving birth. Well, giving birth, she needs somewhere to stay to give birth, and there's no place. There's no home for her to stay, and there's no hotel. She can't even stay at an inn. There's no room at the inn. That's where the whole line comes from. It comes from that. There's just no room. So what do they have to do? They have to go into a barn, and Jesus is born literally into a place that horses eat from. The idea, what is being conveyed, is that Jesus' lowly beginnings. This is very, 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 very important to the synoptics. That's just, everything is low down, but what is low goes up, and that weaves its way in. That's why women are used in the resurrection account as witnesses, because it's low, it's women. It's out the back way. It's those, he came to his own, but they received him not. It's everything is low, but ultimately it's high. That's the whole thing. So what happens is Jesus is born in a manger, in a barn, in a trough where horses eat from. As it turns out, there's some shepherds who are informed about the event that happens. They come to worship the little Jesus. Following that, it's time to go home. So the couple, the new family, travels back, but they don't go to Nazareth yet. They first go to Jerusalem, where Mary brings the turtle doves, the offering that is prescribed in Leviticus that a new mother brings. She does. And then she goes back a month later. She then returns, goes back to Nazareth, and that's where he is raised. And Nazareth is very prominent because that's what he's called Jesus of Nazareth, not Jesus of Bethlehem, because that's where the whole thing starts. Jesus is raised in Nazareth. Well, that story kind of works. It works. It's all right. So Jesus is right back home, and there he's raised, and we have in Luke's story, which is not material. Luke could therefore give us a story of Jesus when he's a young kid growing up, being taken to the temple. We don't have that anywhere else. All right, but when we get to Matthew, it's the opposite. The only thing Matthew has in common with that is Jesus' mother, his name is Mary, and she was a virgin when she conceived with Jesus, and Jesus was born in Bethlehem. That's it. Everything else is reversed. Jesus is not, Mary does not give birth to Jesus in a barn, because the family is from Bethlehem. That's the starting point. Matthew doesn't know anything about Luke's story. There's no worldwide census. That worldwide census never could have possibly happened. Reasons are beyond. In fact, Luke dates the census to when Quirinius, the governor of Syria, replaces Herod Archelaus, which is 6 CE, while Matthew has Jesus' birth Jesus is very much alive during the time of Herod the Great. And Herod the Great, we know, died in 4 BCE. So they're 10 years apart. According to Matthew, Jesus was born essentially around the year 6 BCE. I always found it interesting that according to Matthew, Jesus was born 6 years before Christ. But that's a different story. The key is the following. In Matthew, no babies, there's no story about there's no room at the inn. If you lived in Bethlehem, if your home was in Bethlehem, would you give birth in a barn? No one would. It isn't there. What we have instead in Matthew is wise men from the east following a star that takes them to Herod's palace, and they are then told that the Messiah is to be born in Bethlehem, and the star then takes them to their home, to Jesus' home, literally, and that's where they go to meet Jesus. Herod the Great wants to kill Jesus, and that's a setup for the end. It means the Jews want to kill Jesus right from the get-go. I'm surprised that Christians like us as much as they do, given these stories and how the Jews are portrayed. Like the Goyim, these pagans, these Persian magi, we don't know how many there were, but they're like all over Jesus, bring presents and gifts. They bring 3 presents, and I think that's why the tradition goes that there were 3 magi, but it's not in the text. But the key is these stories are so loaded that I really want to take out a moment to thank Christians for not hating us as much as they do. It's mind-blowing that we got away with these stories, and we are actually here, and that only can be by divine providence. Because anyone reading these kinds of stories where the Jews are juxtaposed, I mean, this is not David Duke. This is the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. This is, the most racist kind of stuff you'd find. The black guy against the white guy. This is very intense. The Jews are always the ones who want to just kill a baby. And this Herod is the king of the Jews. He represents everyone. But the centurion, he recognizes that surely Jesus is the Son of God at the cross. So loaded. And that's why they all hated us. The Christians are not crazy. These texts would lead any rational person to hate the Jews. Okay. Matthew's story. The family gives Jesus born in a house where the Magi come to visit. Herod is now chasing after the Magi because he wants to find out where this house is, because he wants to kill the kid. Why would Herod the Great want to kill the little Jesus? It's very simple, because Herod's king and he doesn't feel like being replaced. Herod was a nut job. Okay? So Herod wants to kill the kid. He's so committed to killing the kid that he ultimately, we are told, kills every baby boy up to 2 years old born in Bethlehem. That's what we get, that Jesus was, according to Matthew, was probably no older than 2 in Matthew's infancy narrative, because it was just a newborn, and why 2? You could tell the difference between a newborn and a toddler very easily. And what happens then is that Joseph is told in a dream in Matthew's infancy narrative that you've got to get out of here, because Herod is seeking to kill the child, to destroy him. This is Matthew chapter 2, verse 13, 14, 50. So Joseph takes the whole family, and they go down to Egypt, and were there until the death of Herod, that it might fulfill what was spoken by the Lord, in this shocking misquote of Hosea chapter 11, verse 1, out of Egypt have I called my son. As it turns out, if you go to Hosea 11:1, we're comparing Matthew 2:15 to Hosea 11:1, it says, when Israel was a child, then I loved him. It's talking about the nation of Israel, and out of Egypt have I called my son. Matthew literally carves out of Egypt have I called my son, pastes it into the story, and Christians just never noticed this. So the story is ripped out of context. There is no passage to support this. This is a fake fulfillment citation. The key is now Herod the Great died. So what normally would happen is it would be time to go back home. Where is home according to Matthew? According to Matthew, home is in Bethlehem, not Nazareth. There's no Nazareth in Matthew's story up to this point, because that's not his story. It's a totally different story. So it's time to go home to Bethlehem. But then the family gets new information. That is that it's true that Herod the Great died, but its situation has become worse. When Herod the Great died, the land of Israel was divided up into different parts. The person we're interested in is Herod Archelaus. That's one of Herod's sons, who was given Judea to rule over. Okay? He has other kids who are given other parts, like the Galilee is under a different son, but Herod Archelaus is given Judea. Now, Herod Archelaus, we know this from history, was a complete nut job. His father was crazy, and his son was even crazier. In fact, when Herod is called Herod the Great, he's not called Herod the Great because a psychiatrist made that call. It's because he just was such a great builder, and he was an amazing, but he was a complete psychopath. He killed his wives, kids, out of his mind, totally out of his mind. Everybody wanted to kill him because he was hated by everyone. But his son was so crazy, Judea incidentally is the southern part of the land of Israel, that in 6, the Romans fired him, removed him as the leader of Judea, because he started a whole thing on the Temple Mount. I'm not going to go into it now. And he then says, he calls in the guy, Quirinus from Syria, who has already governor of Syria, say, I need you to also take care of what's going on here in Judea, because Archelaus is dead. So like Shakespeare, these stories are using historical figures who have quite a reputation, and they are very useful for the plot. Just like a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court is fiction, but it's using the author is using very real figures with a very real personality, set into a real historical framework, so that you can. These are the plot devices that are shaped. The key is Joseph is now told you can't go back home. Now again, according to Luke, Bethlehem is not home. Why would they want to go to Bethlehem? Bethlehem was just a place to go for a census. That's not home. Why would you want to go back to a barn? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense, but Luke never saw Matthew. Luke didn't go, whoa, okay, we can't do that. He never saw Matthew. He saw Mark, we know that. He saw another source, we know that. And he has another source, we know that. It means that Matthew had an M source and Matthew had a Q source, almost certainly. Older sources and sources that Matthew and Luke share but do not appear in Mark, about 235 passages. So what happens is they go, all right, you can't go back home because we have a major psycho now in charge of Judea. Bethlehem again is in Judea, down here. So what they do then is, they go to Nazareth. That's what they do. There's no going back to Bethlehem. So Luke's story has the family start in Nazareth and then go to Bethlehem and then go back to Nazareth in a short period of time. Matthew's story is the opposite. The family starts out in Bethlehem and then leaves down to Egypt, is there for a considerable amount of time, and finally not return back to, but march on to the northern Galilee, because there it was a safer area in the northern region, and that's where Jesus raised in Nazareth. So that's the point of what I think is significant. What I think is important is not numbers. It's not significant to me how many angels were in the tomb. Did they get it right before or not? I think this is a very serious mistake. There could be a wide range of reasons why there are different numbers, besides the fact that it's an error. They could easily come up with a solution to these. What is very significant is that there's a totally different story. Moreover, we understand why the historical datum was massaged and altered, because we know the theology they're trying to produce. We know why. That means, and that's very important. Like when you're looking at a crime scene, you want to get a motive. When you want to be able to find out, why did you do it? Well, if you don't have a motive, when we have the motive that John wants Jesus to be the Lamb of God, because John is using Paul. John is using Paul in having Jesus the Lamb. Paul does that. John is using Paul in the high Christology, where Paul refers to Jesus as Lord, and he's not God in Paul, but he is a deity in the Greek sense in Paul's writings, in the Carmen Christi in Philippians 2. John is using that, and John is going to present us a very high Christology. It's possible that the first 18 verses of John, called the prologue, was written by a different author. According to some scholars, as many as 5 authors for the book of John. It's doubtful John chapter 21 was written by whoever wrote John chapter 20. But what is very important is that when we see a contradiction, we're looking for, give me a rhyme or reason for this. If you just see, how many men were there, and one is rounding it off, or the text is actually telling you Benjamin and Levi are not counted, those are totally unimportant. One is telling you these are fighting men, these are elite soldiers. We right away, the author is in Tanakh is bearing information in there. Moreover, we can then go, there's a discovery here, that Benjamin and Levi were excluded in one census because Levi had to be out. They had to make sure nothing happened to them. And Benjamin was almost a decimated tribe. So, wow, this is so interesting. So Ezra HaSefer does this carefully. Just makes you a warning. I want to make this point, theological point here. Here's a piece so you understand why I'm doing it. warning. I say I have a video on this, on the entire book of Chronicles. Its history is the reason why it was written, because for many people don't read the book of Chronicles because they feel, well, I read Samuel and King, so isn't it the same thing or just a genealogy? It isn't. There's the Chronicles emphasizing the fact that the Davidic dynasty is forever and can never be broken, and that's the point of Chronicles. And it's to tell a returned nation that has been shattered by a Babylonian exile that there's hope, and God's glory is here, and the Davidic dynasty is permanent, and that the glory that Hashem spoke of is restored, and it's okay now, things are going to be fine. And we see that just coming through everywhere in Zechariah, everywhere. So it all is. The difference is that when you are mining out other books, so-called holy books, you can come up with resolutions, and then you have to figure out if they're satisfying or not. With Tanakh, when you actually figure out the reason, it's not only you solve the problem, but you've encountered a discovery. You dig, and not only do you find that they aren't contradictory, but you discover gold. You discover diamonds. Kiss me with the kisses of thy lips, for thy love is better than wine. It's so delicious. When you look at Tanakh, so the contradictions are fabulous, because if you study it properly, you actually dig. And then when you dig, diamonds. Oh, it's beautiful. Oh, wow, this just blew my mind away. Whereas in other books, you go and go, all right, I don't know, is this forced or not forced? And actually, in other books on this very significant contradictions, there's actually a theological reason why he deliberately lied and changed it. And that's very, very significant. And I hope that helps. I thank you very much for joining and asking a question that I waited 40 years to be asked. So thank you and shalom.
Excellent. Okay, cool. And so for all of you people out there who do not have Rabbi's books, you can go to outreachjudaism.org and you can find the books. The CDs represented there are no longer available, but you can get the actual sound off of them by going to his website. Again, outreachjudaism.org. At the very top, you'll look for a tab titled Free Audio. And in that, when a drop-down box, you'll see all the accompanying titles for what's actually in the book. And both books, not the same information. So don't think it's an audio book. It's not. It's more of an explanation of everything that's on those pages. You're going to love it if you haven't tried it yet. So you can download them one at a time, or for a donation of any amount, you can actually download them the entire set to your desktop or to your smart device, whatever you like. And it's pretty amazing to have all that stuff handy like that, because I have it on mine still and still listen to it today. Go ahead, Rabbi.
I just saw one point I want to say to the folks watching the show. If you're a Christian, I don't want you to make any donation. I'm very grateful that you come to our site, and please don't donate any money, because your relationship with God is not for sale. This is very important. If you believe in the God of Abraham, if you are a Jew, a Ben Noach, meaning you've embraced Judaism, yes, certainly, if you believe in our work and are able to help us help those who are in need, certainly too. But if you're a Christian, please do not make any donations. It's so important that you have the courage even to come to listen to the study, and I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for that, and I not apologize in a conventional sense, but if anything I say hurts your feelings, I'm really sorry. It's not my intent. But this is a real issue, and we have to dig here and explore what does God want from us. So I'm very grateful to you for joining us here on the air and joining us on outreachjudaism.org. So,
awesome. Okay, we'll move on to this next caller. Caller, welcome to the show. Please tell us your name and where you're calling from.
Hey, William, my name is Michael.
Hello, Michael. Welcome back.
I'm calling from North Florida, and certainly hello to Rabbi Tovia. My question is also part of a thanks and a quick prayer request. The thanks is I've listened to dozens and dozens of your shows. And literally since we've moved to North Florida, rural North Florida, our entire belief system has changed. And it's changed not just for myself, but for my children in a very real way. Sadly, I weighed 285 at the time. Had never been to the doctor. Thanks to your prayers and different thoughts, I've gone from 285 to 215.
Wow.
I've been weaned off all my blood sugar medication, and the doctor says lose another 40 pounds, probably have you weaned off all your blood pressure medication. So those things to me from you mean everything, mean the world. Our goal, of course, is to move, and you've discussed that and why. South Florida is one of our prime locations, and I've really been tracking the area between Tampa and Pensacola for a variety of reasons. We already work there. We do some health and education work there. So the second prayer I ask from both of you is, as we connect those dots, whether it's for human trafficking or whether it's for young mothers that are having children without dads, that we're able to be very successful in everything that we touch. But my question has to do specifically with Kabads. Kabads. And I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly. Is that there's literally dozens of them associated with universities. And I've always taken you as an Orthodox rabbi. And the closest thing we have, other than temples, which we don't actually have very many, virtually none in North Florida, certainly none in the Panhandle, are the Kabads. And number one, joining the Kabads for leadership, number one. And then number two, if we begin to bring the message William is now bringing through this show to other people, it's not just praying for that. How do we connect those dots? And certainly thank you for keeping up your prayers.
You, Michael.
And I can't thank you enough for being able to call in from time to time and ask these questions.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Frank. Okay.
So wonderful to hear from you. I'm very excited about that fabulous weight loss. That's brilliant. Keep going. I encourage you to study, meditate over Psalm 57 and 58 for a complete recovery for Refuah Shalema. And you'll remain in my prayers. Your family will. It is very striking, the difference between South Florida and... I remember when I lived in the United States, someone once donated a car to our organization. And the only thing was the car was in Miami, or Fort Lauderdale, and I lived in New York at the time. So I did what you figured out I did is I flew down to Fort Lauderdale and drove back to New York, which is, I think it's like 95, just the whole thing. But I was like so shocked because you pass a certain point in Florida, you're like, it's not only like going into another state, it's like going to another universe. The northern part of Florida, you might as well be in, I don't know where, in Louisiana. The whole accent, I mean, in Miami is like New York with palm trees. And the once you're in northern Florida, it's like, wow, a lot of goyim here. And they talk with that. I mean, they must have thought my fancy British accent, it was just striking as well, I'm sure. But it's really like, I don't know exactly where the cutoff, but there's a certain line where it's quite a different, very different in so many ways, politically and the whole deal. Found it very striking. A lot of hatzlacha to you in your work. Chabad is wonderful. What can I not say about Chabad? Chabad is at university campuses. I've lectured for them in all over Florida. It just a point. Chabad is an Orthodox Hasidic group. They are very devoted to helping people return back to the Jewish faith. They're oriented towards assisting Jews who are lost so that they can learn more about the faith that they or their families had long abandoned. So they're very focused on it. That means their number one concern at a university, let's say in Gainesville or Miami or wherever, is the Jewish students. These universities are packed with Jewish students. They want these students who have, many of them have assembly. They want them to have a Jewish place and no pressure. Come pray with us, have dinner, Friday night dinner with us. And that's what their orientation is. They're not oriented towards people who are not Jewish, who are looking to find the Jewish faith. That doesn't mean they'll reject that in any way, but one advice I would give you, as I give everyone, is don't ask Chabad, if you're not Jewish, can I come? Can I attend? Is it okay? I know that makes sense to you, because just don't do it, and don't even question me. Just don't call. What you do is just show up and just participate. Go online, find out when their services is, when their classes are, and just come. At a university campus, obviously even their focus is even more narrow, because now they're dedicated to helping the students. That doesn't mean that people from the community don't show up. They do. In Gainesville, there are people who live in Gainesville who come to the University, Florida there, and it was the first time I ever saw an alligator in my life. Yeah. I was lecturing in Gainesville, and before the lecture, they took me to, I don't know, some pond. I don't know what they have there, like some place with water that looks, we don't have anything like that in Brooklyn. And if there's a thing with water in it, there's like a half of a Chevy sticking out the back with a guy's leg hanging out of the trunk. I made that up. But they actually brought me to, I don't know, a water thing. I'm such a New York kid. So, and then they said, "We'll show you alligator." I said, "Oh my gosh, like, is there a fence?" No fence, nothing. They're right there. And then they come. I said, "Not so fast. I have good eyes." And then my eyes were 20/20. You see this sticking out of the water? And I go, "Oh my gosh, how fast could it get here?" I was like, so shook me up. I still remember seeing the alligator in the water, like an alligator just walk out and go and swallow a pinto. It really was shocking to me. I was so blown away by that. What were we talking about? Oh, so Chabad's orientation is toward helping Jews who have lost their way get back, giving them more tradition, and the people, the rabbis who lead the Chabad houses are very, very dedicated. I mean, their excitement about their work is infectious. It's just, and just come and tell them Rabbi Singer says hi, and just don't ask, can I come? Okay, and let them get to meet you and so on. Don't ask them questions about the New Testament. They don't study that. Okay, just like Christians don't study the Bhagavad Gita. They don't. If you have questions about that, come to me or whatever. Just don't go to them. And the reason I say this is because there are Christians who go with the purpose of converting Jews to Christianity, and they're aware of that. So they are a little bit nervous about them. So just do what I'm telling you, always. And I think they're terrific. So Michael, Hatzlacha to you, and at Refuah Shalema. And it's great to hear from you. Thank you.
All right, very good. Let's go ahead and move on to this next caller. Caller, welcome to the show. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
Hi, my name is Lee. I'm calling from Canada.
Welcome, Lee.
Hi. So I just have a question. We were reading Parshas Yitro, and he's known as the father of the B'nai Keni, or Keni, the Canaanites, which in the literature it shows that they're known as scholars and scribes, and even held a place in the Sanhedrin. And we find in that the first time we see them is Genesis 15:19. And I noticed that in those times, the lands of the Canaanites, Kenizzites, and Kadmonites will be the expanded borders of Israel. And then we have the important people, Ziphrah, Yael. And it seems like they're the B'nai Noach of the highest order in the Torah. Why don't we hear more of them as role models? And the Parsha study almost never talks about the Canaanites. When you listen to Parsha study on Yitro, you never hear that anything about the Canaanites, really. But I find that strange because of the fact that they were very important and held in the highest regard, it seems. So if you have anything extra on the Canaanite...
Sure.
Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for your question. Go ahead and hang up, and you can tune in for the answer, okay?
Thanks. Thank you.
All right, bye.
So this is the nature of the Torah. That is to focus, zoom in on only one issue, and ignore so many other things that are very, very interesting. The Torah, when seeking to tell us about why Abraham was righteous, barely explains why he's righteous and deserves the blessings that are given to him right at the outset of Genesis chapter 12. Being thrown to a furnace by Nimrod is not even present in the text. The Torah is interested in one point. We're not going to go into it now. And that's the point we encounter at the end of Genesis 11 with Abraham marrying the daughter of his dead brother. That's the key. That's all. So the Torah is like a laser beam, not interested in discussing anything else besides that. You have in the oral tradition, there you'll have a lot of the missing pieces that are filled in, but the Torah should never be looked at as a historical work. It's certainly using history to teach us how to live our lives, but if you are in any way think that you're reading my favorite author, Barbara Tuchman of blessed memory, you'll be thrown off, because Barbara she would have gone through every single piece and just split it apart and broke it apart. This is how they play a role. The Torah with regard to Jesse, and in fact, here this is not any portion of the Torah. This is the book of Exodus, where the 10 Commandments are given, and it is named after the father-in-law of Moses, Yisro. Yisro was transformed. Torah says, Vayishma Yisro. Torah is interested in that Yisro heard. What did he hear about? He heard about Kriyas Yamsuf, the splitting of the sea. The whole world heard about it. I mean, that whole world heard about it. And he heard about Muhammad Amalek, when the Jewish people defeated the Amalekites. He heard and he came. The point of the Torah in Exodus, when we encounter Yisro, is one issue. And that is Jethro observed an event, and he did it. He moved. He moved ahead quickly. Ma Shoma Ubo, what did he hear? And he came. That's all Torah says. Torah is like so. Torah says, Jethro hears and he goes. Well, what did he hear? Where did he go? You're asking me that they're going to talk about Canaan. Torah's not interested in that. They're interested. It's there, but this is not the function. The point of Yisro, why he's so amazing, is that a lot of people go, oh, that's terrible. A lot of people don't notice. A lot of people spend their whole lives, they don't even notice. Yeah, I heard, too bad. Some people go, oh, it's terrible. Jethro was a doer. He hears about Kriyas Yamsuf, the parting of the sea. These are national events. It shook up the world. They defeated the Amalekites. Who defeated? Not some big, strong people. These were Sakrachin Jews who had just endured hundreds of years in Egypt. They were slaves, came out of nothing, and they were able to defeat a mighty nation, a wicked nation. They defeated them. And he heard and he came. That's the point. If you don't get that, sweethearts, then you miss it altogether. That's all the Torah is saying, is that when you see something, observe. Observe what you're looking. Look carefully. Be a tzayfiyah haliches beisa. The woman of valor is such a woman. The one who look at Sofa is a herdsman, is someone in the watchtower. Watch and observe. That's what Moses did in Exodus chapter 3. A burning bush. Here in Indonesia, there's fires all over the place. Little fires everywhere. Why? Because people burn their garbage. I'm not kidding. But who looks? You see a fire. Moses happens to be at what would be Mount Sinai. He's at the mountain of God. We're told in the text for that reason. And there's a bush on fire. Now, normally, if you're in some place and you see a bush on fire, you figure someone's burning their trash. How would you even know that the bush would not be consumed? How would you know that? enough to keep going and looking what's going on here. No one would notice that. If you saw a bush burning, would you notice if the bush was not consumed? You would never notice it. I don't think. I wouldn't. I would just go, oh, I wonder who started a fire. So Moshe Rabbeinu Olav HaShalom was an observer, because you need to watch for a while, and you need to make sense of the events. You need to ask yourself, what's going on here? Is a bush, and it won't be consumed. Maybe it's vegan, you're not. So he's looking closer, and finally he's told, take off remove your shoes from your feet. Where you're standing is a holy place. Meaning, get your feet in the ground. But in order for Moshe Rabbeinu to have made the discovery, this requires an observer. A leader has to have that quality. Watch history, keep your eye on history. What's happening? Look out. A tzeifa is someone who's in a watchtower. Jethro, his father-in-law, had the quality of a doer, not just a complainer. And we see this theme with Yisro repeatedly. And of course, his life is a model for us. When you see something, oh, that's really awful. That's terrible. Do something. Another event with Yisro is very important. So as it turns out, Moshe Rabbeinu is answering the questions of the children of Israel. He's the judge. They were lining up big, long lines of people to ask Moshe Rabbeinu their questions. Could you imagine such a spectacle? Moshe is there. And there's a lot of people, all kinds of questions. In Jewish law, there are all kinds of very complicated questions. And we see in the Torah, when ultimately judges are instructed, they're taught all the hidden matters. That's the oral tradition. Because people didn't have access to all that. They're just learning it. So Jethro says, what's going on here? What are you doing? He sees his son-in-law sitting there with a long line of people. And could you imagine that? And Jethro goes and he says, let's come up with a solution to this situation. He goes, you don't have to be answering everybody's question. We could set up a hierarchy of judges, of courts, of judges, one level, another for a higher level, another. You instruct these highly erudite individuals in the secret matters, right? If you don't believe in oral Torah, what does the secret matters mean? Why do you even need a judge? If everything's there, just open the book and there's your answer. Okay. Right there, bingo. Here's a setup of bureaucracy, and ultimately you're the Supreme Court, meaning you're the high judge. If there's a problem that none of the other strata of judges could solve, then it goes to you. So you only handle the most difficult cases, and it worked out great. This was good. This was a good thing in Torah. That's what they're interested in. Not interested in Canaan. You want to know about Canaan, you could read about it in other places. The Torah is interested in saying, you see, Yisro, there he goes again. Yisro sees a crisis, and he acts on it. Now, let's ask the question, do you think, honestly, that Yisro was the only person that discovered that people did not enjoy waiting on a long line? I assure you, everybody in line was very unhappy with that situation. What do you think? There was a long line waiting for Moshe Rabbeinu. Vayaminu Hashem of Moshe Avdai. There was a huge line waiting for him. You don't think people waiting online were not ripping the hair out of their head? What's going on? You think he's the only one who happens to notice that the line is going around the block? He's not there. Everybody knows it. So what's the nafkamina? What's the difference between Yisro, and everybody else? What's the difference? The difference is not that they notice the problem. Milchamas Amalek, the war with Amalek, Kriyas Yamsuf, was observed by the world. Everybody saw it. The difference is Jethro said, I'm going to do something about it. And he institutionalizes a system to solve the problem. He steps in to make a difference. A lot of people don't do that. They go, oh, it's terrible. See what's going on. Everybody's kvetching, not doing. Yisro was a doer, and that's why the parsha is named after him. The very parsha we have, the Aser Sedibros, the 10 Commandments in Exodus 20, is named after him. Because the message is one thing. It's not interested, let me tell you about the history of the Kedim. Not interested in that. There is other information, other places you pointed out. Not interested. We want to tell you now what to do. You're getting the Torah. I want to tell you how to live your life. You have to be watching always, be an observer. Imagine Hanukkah 2,200 years ago, after the Greeks were defeated, the Syrian Greek Empire was defeated by the Maccabees. They lit a menorah. They only had enough oil for one day. It lasted for 8 days. They had to sit there and watch what's going on there. And then the following year, they had to assign that day, the Shemona Yimei Chanukah, to be a day of praise. That required observation. Well, give a look at that. Keep your eyes open. So please, I hope I'm obviously mapping your question onto a larger issue. The Torah is a laser beam. It's not interested in ancillary issues. The Torah will skip massive periods of time. It's not important. Not for now. I got to get this point out. This is how you have to behave. You see it? Observe, watch, act. To observe and kvetch and complain, Hashem's not interested in such people. Watch Jethro. Yishma Yisro. Yisro heard. What do you mean he heard? Telling us that he had good hearing? Yisro heard? Yisro, he heard and he come. What did he hear? He came. What? That's you could try to submit that as in a newspaper, lahavdil. They would you never get a job. Why? Because they want you to tell us the details. What did he hear? Where was he? Was he sitting having coffee? Was he having tea? Was he taking a stroll? How did he hear? He had the telephone. He got an email. Give us detail. Torah is not interested. Torah is a laser beam. The Torah is there to tell you how to live in this world, how to act this world. Never is interested in taking this. I want you to know. It's not interested in fancy things. Pick a card, any card. Don't tell me it's the 3 of spades. Not interested in magic men walking around. Not interested in that stuff. Unless there's something very unusual going on, not interested in that. Torah is interested in one thing, and that is know how to live your life. The Torah means literally teaching, and it's instruction manual for life. That's the point of it, not the Canaan. Anyways, thank you so much for that question. You're the first person that ever asked it on the show.
All right, awesome. Very good. Okay, we'll move on to this next caller. Caller, welcome to the show. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from. Caller, you're live on the air. Are you with us?
Yes.
Very good. You're live. What's the question for Rabbi?
My question was, Rabbi, hello, I'm sorry, I'm down with the flu, but the difference between in the Tanakh, how God presents himself when he speaks from heaven, he's very clear on who it is that's talking. And in the New Testament, it seems like it's just a voice that comes down. It's not clear at all.
Rabbi, is it clear?
Okay. Not really. Let me I want to just winnow this through with you. You're saying lahavdil in the Torah is very clear who is speaking to who, and in the Christian Bible, it's not clear who's speaking. Like at the baptism, is that what you mean? Something like that? Like, you are my son, on this day I've begotten you, or this is my son, whether using Matthew or John, or is that what you mean?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Right. So, for me, what is very interesting, just me personally, what is much more interesting than that is what is being said. I think the idea is that God is speaking, the Holy Spirit is speaking. And forgive me, but I want to take it in a different direction. What is very interesting to me is Jesus being told in the second person, you are my son? Because Jesus doesn't know this yet. In fact, nobody does, because Jesus adopted as God's son at his baptism. In Mark, the Holy God is speaking to Jesus. You are my son. On this day I've begotten you. That's what's important. I don't think it's difficult to figure out what the author has in mind. But what is critical is that we don't have any infancy narrative, virgin birth, prologue, John, none of that. So Mark is presenting us with a Jesus who becomes God's son at his baptism. Now, in the Synoptic Gospels, you would not expect to find that, because Jesus is made to be the Son of God at a much earlier stage. We're told this explicitly in Luke. This is why Jesus is given this name. Mary is told this by the angel. He is called Jesus because he is to save people. He is to bring salvation, and therefore he is the Son of God, because the Holy Spirit will come upon you. That's the therefore. So as far as Luke is concerned, Jesus becomes the Son of God at his conception. And that information is given to Mary before she even conceives. So therefore, what we would expect to find in the virgin birth type narrative is that at the baptism, I'm not interested in who's talking. I think it's fairly clear that somehow God is speaking. What is coming across is that Jesus now is referring to Jesus in the third person. This is my son. Why? Because in the later, more improved Gospels, Jesus became God's son at his conception in Matthew and Luke. In John, it surely will never come up. As John, Jesus becomes God's son in the eternal past. Forget about that. John is zooming way past. John is written probably 10, 15 years after Matthew and Luke. So I just would encourage you, at least this is the way I look at the text, I see that as Jesus being addressed and being informed of information. You are my son, on this day I've begotten you. Or, this is my son. Well, that's what's important. Because if this is my son, then who is God, the Holy Spirit, talking to? Is the God speaking to Jesus? And that would be an adoptionist theology, which we would encounter in the book of Mark, which is adoptionist means Jesus is adopted as God's son at his baptism. That's what that means. That's a much lower Christology. And whereas in Matthew and Luke, in contrast, Jesus became the Son of God. Literally, God made Mary pregnant, not sexually, but the Holy Spirit made Mary pregnant, and then Jesus became the Son of God. See, so now it's a little further back in Jesus' career at his conception. John is going to go further back, because that's John, the fourth gospel, is a more improved Christology, a higher Christology. And when does Jesus become the Son of God and divine? Well, that's in the eternal past. In the beginning was the Word. It means he's going way back. And in fact, the whole world was created through Jesus. And Jesus was God. So I don't believe that Jesus is, in John's view, is God, meaning the God. He is meaning the only God, but he is a divine being for sure. John is presenting Jesus as like Paul, as a divine being. But this is all in a Greek sense. It's not going to make, if you're watching this and you're not studied how the Greeks view the divinity, the deities, and the henotheism that was embraced in the Greco-Roman world, this will be very strange to you. Because if you're a person who just knows about one God, so you're either God or you're not God, and there's nothing in between. In the Western thinking, in a universe that was shaped by Alexander the Great, who changed the world forever, when he defeated the Persians and spread Greek thinking everywhere. That's how they thought, and that's where they're coming from. That's why this book is written in Greek. So John sees Jesus as divine, but you have to ask yourself, in what sense is he divine? He's divine in a Platonic sense, not in a Jewish sense. In a Jewish sense is monotheism. Monotheism means, you can hear the two words. Mono means only, means to exclusion of anything else. Henotheism, you can hear those two Greek words. The theism in Heno is one God, but it means there's one grand God. But then there are other deities that are subordinate, but are still considered divine. So focus on that, my friend. Focus on what is being said and to who is being addressed at the baptism scene. The Holy Spirit is addressing Jesus in Mark, but not in the other Gospels, because in the other Gospels, he's been the Son of God for a much more extended period of time. Matthew and Luke for 30 years. So John, who knows? Okay? So thank you very much for your question.
Okay, good deal. We're going to go ahead, and this will be the last point of topic for today. I'm just going to read. This is by Tyler Weber on YouTube. It said, is it possible that God might send another prophet who is not Mashiach, or is he just going to send Mashiach? And is Mashiach a prophet or a high level of prophet?
I want to unpack that because I want to. Mashiach is certainly a prophet, certainly, and the question is. So in Judaism, I can think of different levels of prophets. The highest level of prophet is Moses, who no one could possibly equal, because Moses spoke to God face to face as a man speaks to his friend, which means he didn't do what Shmuel had to do and go into a deep sleep when he spoke to God. He was completely awake. He was at that level. Other prophets would go into a sleep. Other prophets at a very late stage would receive their prophecy, but was from an angel. The later prophets, Zechariah, Haggai, Malachi, Daniel, especially like Daniel, because Daniel begins his prophetic career in Bavel, not in the land of Israel. It means he begins his prophetic career as a young man. He was only 14 years old, outside of the land of Israel, but he's a prophet in every conventional sense. So there is a Ruach HaKodesh, meaning that there are people who are on such a high level that they receive a divine inspiration, but it's not on the level of prophets of the past. I will say again that in Judaism there really is there's Moses and there's everybody else. There's Moses, whose level of prophecy, that he was a completely conscious state, is completely, and he stands alone in that point. So I hope that helps you with your question, and thank you so much for joining us on air.
All right, very good. Well, we'll go ahead and call that a wrap. Sorry about that disturbance there. I'm trying to get a Skype call. I even marked my Skype as unavailable, and somehow it still came through. That's okay, though. But, okay, Rabbi, unless you've got anything else to add to that, we actually have a few more minutes. Can I ask you a question to clarify something?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, I hear this a lot. Sometimes whenever I put a post up about Jesus and, on Facebook or whatever, somebody will come back and comment pretty dynamically by saying his name is not Jesus. And I'm thinking, okay, so if his name was Jonathan, would that matter? I mean, the fact that maybe his birth name was, maybe it was or wasn't Yeshua or Yehoshua, whatever the case may be, what implication would that have? I mean, does that have any implication whatsoever on the possibility of him being Mashiach? Because, I mean...
No,
right.
No, it is no implication on that point, but it is important to Christians, because Christians are struggling with something that they won't talk about. And that is that why is this whole thing so Greek? Why is it so Greek up and down? I mean, why are the books written in Greek? And therefore, conservative evangelicals want to believe and want to discover, this is what would make them very happy, is to discover if Matthew was originally, the book of Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, was originally written in a Hebrew Aramaic, which some of them mistakenly point to Papias, whose writings did not survive, and we only know about him through Irenaeus and later church fathers, Eusebius, and Papias wasn't talking about our Matthew, almost certainly not. The point is, what's troubling Christians is, why isn't this thing more Jewish? Not there aren't Jewish characters in it. The point is, Jesus is a Greek name. Now, in the defense of the name Jesus, Christians can and should point to, because I don't think this is the point, is that the name was Yeshua or Yehoshua, which should have been a very popular name, Joshua, Yoshua. It's all the same name. Yeshua, that would be just a little truncated. We have, in fact, that name in Tanakh of other people, like Yoshua ben Yehotzadok, the high priest at the beginning of the Second Temple period. Literally, we're told in Matthew's infancy narrative that Jesus is to be called Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. So Jesus doesn't map onto anything as a Greek, but it would be Yehoshua, meaning salvation. So it does, very often I find that Christians, that I could do a better job than many Christians can in defending their own their religion. In this case, it's very clear that what is being conveyed by Matthew speaking Greek, is that Jesus will be Yeshua because of, this is the reason why he's called that, because he's going to save his people from their sins. But Christians are like, please, 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 can we just please, please, please find a Hebrew gospel that really goes back to the first century? I mean, that would be, for them, would be unbelievable. They don't even have a Greek manuscript from the first century. It doesn't exist. The earliest manuscript fragment is P52 from John 18. That's from, let's say, 130. That's the earliest. It's Greek, and it's John. So that's like a disappointment to them. They want come up with something Hebrew. This thing is supposed to be a Jewish book, a continuation, a fulfillment of the Old Testament that dovetails, one does the other. So Christians want it to be that way. They're not happy with the Jesus part. They want it to be the Jewish part. Now, Christians in general want this, okay? Some Christians are more sensitive to this, and some who are knowledgeable are really baffled by how Goyish the church turned all this. Not so much with Jesus' name, but with his brother's name, James. James is really very striking. You could see that there was an effort in the early church, and that will bleed its way into the Gospels, to eradicate anything Jewish, and it'll bleed into the church fathers. And that's, where the heck did James get his name? What does that name mean? Now, people who know a little will say, well, James is the brother of Jesus, and it really is Jacob. But why is then he called James? Why can't he just be called Jacob? See? This is a big, big problem. Why? How did that happen? Because there is an equivalent, and it's so James. What? I mean, this is like a total mystery. How did James ever get in there? It's such a mystery because if we go to the Greek, that means if you open up any Greek New Testament and look for the name James, you're not going to find James in the Greek. You're going to find Jacob, Yaakov in there. It's literally what it says in the Greek. The Greek has Yaakov. That means that this happened before English, but it already goes to James because it's to strip away, to make sure that James, his version loses, and it's Paul's version that wins. It's the Greek that comes in and the Jew out. You see what I'm saying? There is no explanation. There's no lie. Now, that doesn't mean no one ever came up with anything. Believe me, they sat and thought about this. You'll not find any of these explanations satisfying. The only explanation is that James is a real Tsakrachina Greek name, and they really didn't want Yaakov, and they didn't want Yaakov running around there. Yeah, it would be very, very Jewish. They wanted, what's wrong with Yaakov? As I said, the Greek says Yaakov. Literally, the Greek says Yaakov. So how the heck did this get to James? So in short, the reason Jesus would have been the name that the author of Matthew had, Yeshua would have been the name that those who contribute to the book of Matthew had in mind, because that's what would make sense with Matthew's infancy narrative. But it all goes Greek. And one other point I must mention, and that is that Greek, this is not my theory that Greek means not Jewish. That is in the Christian Bible. Greek and Gentile are used interchangeably. It means Greek is Goy in the Christian Bible. They're interchangeable. To be a Greek means to be a Goy, because Greek was antithetical. It's not like English and Spanish. So you have two languages as Romance languages, but, they're similar. Portuguese and Spanish. No. Greek means I'm not a Jew. I'm against the Jews. I'm against everything that Judaism stands for. As I said, this is in the Christian Bible. For instance, Romans chapter 1, verse 16. Paul addresses the church in Rome. He had not attended yet. He says, I am not ashamed of the gospel. It's the power of salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and then to the Greek. That's what it literally says. But there are some translations that render that and then to the Gentile. And they're interchangeable. Why? Greek means a guy in that genre. This is so important. Today, this is all confusing. What does a Greek mean? You know, Greek doesn't mean, it means a salad. I'll have a Greek salad. I'm not even sure what's in it. And if it doesn't do these things, then it meant everything. Which way are you going? You going Aristotle, the Rabbah of Alexander the Great? Are you going to Tyre? Choose, it's one way or the other. Leidach Gisa, the other side of the street, the opposite direction. You have Galatians 3:28. Literally, again, Greek Gentile. In the body of Christ, there is no man or woman. There's no Jew or Greek. Greek is used there, just interchangeably Gentile. As I said, many translations, they run it both ways. Why? Because it's the same. This is not my, like, I came with this conspiracy theory. This is, what I'm telling you is not controversial in the scholarly world. This is very widely understood and widely known. So the fact that the church fathers, who were despised anything Jewish, as they should if Paul was their guide, Ignatius, a very early church father, the Bishop of Antioch, essentially the first church father, he's extorting he's excoriating Judaism and calling upon his followers, don't do anything Jewish. He's the one who comes up with the word Catholic. He's the one who comes up, really just says Jesus is God, like, this is really early stuff. And he's the one that encourages Christians to celebrate Sunday as a Sabbath. He's the guy. That's early, because what do you have before Ignatius? You have the Apostolic Fathers, and then you have that's right at the get-go. So it was everything Christian was virulently anti-Jewish. Now, there were groups running around at the time. There's always someone who has a difference. So, of course, there were groups like Ebionites and Nazarenes whose writings mysteriously never survived because they didn't want it to survive. They were crushed. But we know about them from their enemies. There were groups that were rejecting Paul, rejecting any movement of Shabbos to Sunday, and the notion that you shouldn't keep the Shabbos anymore, and the law. They disappeared because of what Rabbi Gavriel said. You can't do both. You look at 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 21, where Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, excoriating his own people, says, how long do you hold between these two opinions? Either they choose Hashem or choose Baal. Choose Baal or choose God. Can't have both. What does that mean? They were doing both. They had Jews for Baal. Jews for Baal.com. And Eliyahu Hanavi says you can't do Hebrew Greek. No way. Now, at that time, he's dealing with an earlier idolatry. You can't go in between. Pick one or pick the other. No in-between games. So therefore, for Christians, again, they can't point to the Matthew infancy narrative and other places where they can say that what early Christians had in mind was Jesus' name was Yehoshua, Yeshua, Yeshu, whatever, some extract of salvation, which is a common name. It is common to name children with the name of God and a quality about God. And we did that always. It's called Yoshua, means, or Isaiah, the salvation of God, and so on. That was very, very common. This is not like, Jesus called Yoshua, therefore he was. So very, it was a common name. But we could see, as I said, the James part, the fact this is way too beyond the scope of your question, but we could see that Acts is really going to work hard to minimize James's role as the leader of the church, because the author of the book of Acts was devoted to one thing, and that is to elevating Paul, and everyone else is jettisoned into the background. And Peter disappears off the stage fairly quickly in this book. And it's Paul's Christianity that has to be elevated. And therefore, Acts will work hard to minimize mentioning James by name. It comes up, but even though it ultimately has to come up, and there's no question that Acts 15 the ecumenical council, or the issue of Gentiles having to circumcise themselves in order to become Christians, that no doubt is a historical event. But again, the idea is it's Paul's version that ultimately succeeds, and it does. Paul invented Christianity as you know it, and that all the other forms are defeated, and they were crushed by the church, and none of them survived. Anyways, that was a good question, William.
Okay, so just for one final clarification, his name was supposed to be called, according to the New Testament, they were supposed to call him Emmanuel, right? Why didn't they? Do you think it? I mean, what's your point on that? What's the point on it, basically?
So, the New Testament just quotes that in Matthew 1:23 as a misquote of Isaiah chapter 7 verse 14. It's something that's there's no solution to unless you just do a little bit, be a little creative about it, and that is you have in Isaiah 7:14, behold, hine al mahora, behold, the young woman is with a child, and she'll give birth. And the chorus Shmai Emmanuel, and she will call his name Emmanuel. So they changed the whole thing. Behold, a virgin shall be with child. She's not pregnant yet, and they will call. Notice it says there, they will call his name Emmanuel. What I'd like you to do, if you can, is compare carefully Matthew 1:23 with Isaiah 7:14. But don't look at what everybody looks at. Look at that pronoun. So in Isaiah 7:14. It says she will call his name Emmanuel. Who's she? It's the mother. That's the antecedent. So the mother will call his name Emmanuel. The koros, that's in the feminine. She, it's in the imperfect feminine. She, third person. She will call his name Emmanuel. Now, the problem is the point you raised, William, and that is, as it turns out, it didn't go. She didn't go around calling him Emmanuel. It never happened. So Matthew, or someone who's improving, editing Matthew's book, changes that to they will call his name Emmanuel. So if you leave it, she will call his name Emmanuel in Matthew, everyone's going to ask the question, but Mary never called Jesus Emmanuel. So therefore, she's not calling him Emmanuel because, in fact, she's told in the Annunciation of Luke that it's Jesus, not Emmanuel. And therefore they see Emmanuel as not his actual name, but as a device to convey that God is with you. And that becomes a method, a model to say that literally God is now among you. This is how this Christology works out. And for the church fathers, it works out very well. They all go this direction. That is that Emmanuel is not conveying that this was literally Jesus' name, but it's the message that Jesus is among you. Even though we can see in context in Isaiah 7, of course, it's not talking about a virgin. The event is a civil war between where there's an alliance between Syria and the northern kingdom against the southern kingdom, and that it's the northern kingdom along with Syria that are destroyed. And we see that God saves the Jewish people because Emmanuel, because Utsu Eisa Vasufa, Isaiah chapter 8, Dabru Davu Yakum, let the enemies of God's people come with a plan for Sufa. It will come to know Dabu, let them plan for Lo Yochum. It will not be established. Why? Ki Immanuel, because God is with you. That's the key. That's what comes up. In fact, Isaiah himself, Isaiah who's a Navi, who's a Kodesh and a Torah, is a holy man. Isaiah says this beferish, openly, explicitly, not implicitly. What I'm saying is not something. It literally Yeshaya had Novi says in 8:18. It's right there. It's the same context, same event going on. The chapter break is artificial. Isaiah says, "The Lord has given me children as portents for a sign up ahead for the nation." That's why Yeshaya is given such names. His children are given these names. He has another child, Shar Yoshev, the remnant will return, Isaiah 7:3. Why? Tanakh is not interested. Make sure you get the names right. So when you register, you send the baby presents, but that's not interesting. If the Torah is putting a name there, it's a big signpost, and Isaiah tells you, this is why I'm giving names. And in fact, Yeshaya is told to give the child a name that the mother is a different name. The mother is told to give you a name about that Hashem is with you, protects you. And Isaiah's name that we encounter because in Isaiah 8, Isaiah is told to call the child a different name. Quicken the loot, hasten the booty. A different name. That's the destruction of the enemy kingdoms. That they're finished. They came against the house of David, against Malchus David. They're destroyed. So that's why names play such an important role here. But they're not, we have to call all in. We got to call Nordstrom. We have to go on Amazon. And we're going to click off, send us a gift. And then in the message, who do we put the baby's name in? What kind of stretchy? Is it a pink or not? Do we have his name in blue? Tanakh is not interested in Amazon. Tanakh, there's a message here, but the message, we know what it is. It's not the message what our good friends in the church and the Vatican say it is. The message is what Yeshaya HaNovi HaKodesh VaTorah, this holy man of God, tells us it is. Conversely, just to make this point, and that is that conversely, at the same exact time, Isaiah and Hosea, Yeshaya and Hosea lived at the same time. Hosea was slightly older, but their lives completely overlapped. Hosea was in the north, Yeshaya was in the south in Yerushalayim. Hosea doesn't marry a prophetess, as Isaiah did, a girl who went to a nice base Yaakov. No, he marries a prostitute. That's a Navi, a prostitute, because there's a symbol. The northern kingdom had prostituted themselves. And as he's married to her, she's still prostituting herself because there's a picture of what the northern kingdom is up to. And the names of the children that Hosea is given is exactly the opposite. Not Emmanuel, God is with you, not Shar Yoshev, not Quicken Lord. It's just the opposite names. I won't have mercy on you. You will not be seated. You are not my children. Whoa, you're not my nation. Now, Hosea chapter 2 says ultimately you're coming back. But the key is that look at the names. So therefore, you'll be very, very careful how you study Tanakh. Very careful and understand it in context. And just drink it. It's so beautiful. It's so really, it's like the universe. I love science because it's all math. It all works. It has to work, And the fact that the universe is just governed by laws that have to be perfect, that's what Tanakh is. It's so perfect. It all works out. When you see an anomaly, when you encounter something that's strange, there's such a discovery. Dig there. That's where you dig. There's a different. Start digging. Get out the shovel because you're going to find gold, diamonds. Water is going to come sprouting out. Every anomaly, dig. Hafach b'vafach kikulaba. Turn it over. Keep digging. Kikulaba. Everything is inside. Anyways, very good question. Thank you for that follow-up.
All right, very good. Well, we're going to wrap it up for now then. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Rabbi, for your time that you have invested here. Great show today. And I look forward to seeing you guys next week. Same time, same place, Hashem willing. And I'm sure we'll all find out early enough if something comes up. But so far, so good. Been a good show, Rabbi. Thank you all for tuning in. See you next time. Here's the camera. Peace. Shalom, shalom.
חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה והכמיהה. אני אתה אתם תמיד כולם ביחד. חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה והכמיהה.
Hold on a second.